May the words of my lips and the meditation of our hearts be now and always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. We came home from holiday just yesterday evening, just in time to come over to the quite excellent concert here. We went home, had a bit to eat, and went to sleep. After a week's relaxation, the blend we experienced here of Holst's spacious music and the imaginative challenge of listening to new poetry left me in a spacious, expansive, reflective mode. Well, I got up fairly early this morning, and knowing that I was coming over to take the 8 o'clock service and who knows what else was going to befall, I looked quickly through some emails, 130 of them or so. One in particular, as I glanced at the headlines, caught my eye. That abbreviation said, Moving Clergy Pay Document. Instantly, my mind ran through a range of possibilities. Had someone published an emotional paper about clergy poverty, filled with touching examples of desperate need in the parsonage? Was there a plan to bolster our stipends? For a moment, it was all rather stimulating in a range of headlines, but not for long. Once opened, that truncated title now read, Moving Clergy Pay Documents and Payroll to the New People System. And I can't deny that's perfectly worthy and important in its way, but not exactly full of human interest, nor the stuff to engage the emotions. Communication is such a strange and unpredictable thing. What we intend to get across isn't necessarily what is heard or read. So much depends on the experience, the expectations, the moods of the hearers or the readers. Early in his first long letter to the Corinthian community of Christians, Paul reminds them of how they first met. How, on that occasion, he had felt so inadequate in making his proclamation, how nervous he'd been, how lacking he'd been as an orator, how unsophisticated had been his message. Now, from this 2023 end of the telescope, from Paul, this seems rather disingenuous. There's abundant evidence of his travels around the Greco-Roman world and of the persuasive power of his spoken message in place after place after place. And for a couple of thousand years now, people have preserved and hung upon his every written word. Puzzling one's way through his arguments to the Romans, arguments about faith and salvation, it's hard to conceive of Paul as nervous and unsophisticated in his thought. What he means, though, is that when he was first in Corinth, he didn't approach his audience in the ways they were familiar with hearing. The use of all those techniques of classical oratory, flashy arts and fireworks of speech, artfully displaying his learning and philosophical sophistication. In a place where they expected the speaker to make a show, he set all that aside. He kept it simple. To draw an analogy from last night's concert, or rather not to do so, he'd abandoned the orchestra, and rather than giving them a Willis organ, he simply gave them the tune. Jesus Christ and him crucified. True to form, of course, Paul doesn't sustain that simplicity for very long in this letter. Immediately, he's pointing out the irony that there really was wisdom in what he'd spoken. Paul can't help himself. He's a subtle mind. He revels in complexity. He loves to argue and to persuade. But he also knows that all those attributes and whatever fruits they may generate from himself and others, all that pales into insignificance beside the simple message that he dwelt on there. 5 words in its English translation: Jesus Christ and him crucified. Last evening we sat in this cathedral and listened, or rather feasted upon, a rich diet in music and words. And I, for one, marvelled at my neighbour John Challenger's artistic mastery. Yet paradoxically, what lingers in my mind and evokes my imagination is the visual imagery. The projections on the screen, which is now to my right and out of your sight, but was last night here in the centre of the cathedral, the projections of each of the 7 planets against a background of the stars. Something which I could see most nights if I bothered to turn off the lights and step outside. We live with a high degree of sophistication and sophisticated expectations. We live here, and in a great many Christian places of worship, with a high degree of subtlety and sophistication, complexity, a rich diet. But some very basic stuff sits at its heart: bread, wine, Christ, and him crucified. Amen.